On November 30th, 2025, a 44-meter Philippine patrol boat looked small, outgunned, and badly out-tunned. Minutes later, 3 much larger Chinese ships were turning away from Luzon, and Beijing had a 300-ton problem it couldn't easily solve. This is how a Philippine ship, a squadron of U.S. Reapers, and 1 new missile frigate boxed in China's push, without a single shot fired. At 0638, the BRP Cabra, Parola-class patrol vessel hull PC-20, was on routine patrol of Zambales province in the West Philippine Sea. Routine in this part of the world means China Coast Guard cutters loitering just outside the exclusive economic zone, maritime militia boats pretending to be fishing vessels in formation, and at least 1 journalist praying something dramatic happens on camera. On Cabra's bridge, radars turned sea clutter into clean tracks. 1 contact, then 2, then 3. All big. 2 of the contacts displaced over 3,000 tons each, large China Coast Guard vessels. The 3rd was smaller but still several times Cabra's size, all angling toward waters off Zambales, the same coastline that faces Scarborough Shoal. On paper, that's not a fair fight. 1 321-ton patrol ship versus 3 hulls 10 times her displacement, backed by the world's largest Coast Guard, and a navy Beijing loves to film for propaganda. But paper isn't where this fight would be won. Instead of easing away, Cabra altered course toward the threat, sliding into a blocking position along the edge of the Philippines' recognized maritime zones. On the replay, the geometry is simple. Any Chinese attempt to press closer now had to go through 1 small white hull that very clearly wasn't bluffing. Cabra's captain didn't just have a chart and a radar. He had something far more dangerous to Beijing's strategy, a legal kill chain. The Philippine Maritime Zones Act, UNCLOS, and the 2016 Permanent Court of Arbitration ruling that shredded China's 9-dash line. Every meter Cabra sailed, every course correction, every VHF call was designed to feed that chain, intercept, record, document, publish. The 3 Chinese ships edged toward the outer approaches, close enough to probe Manila's response, not close enough to claim a navigation misunderstanding. Cabra moved first, shifting into the corridor they were aiming for and holding a line across it that basically said, "If you want Zambales today, you're going through us." The tonnage ratio was brutal. The geography was not. In shallow, reef-studded water, a 321-ton hull can turn inside the path of a 3,000-ton cutter. It can work where sandbars move with every monsoon. It can sit in 20 to 30 meters of depth where a bigger ship's margin for error shrinks to a few meters and a few seconds. On Cabra's bridge, bullet-resistant panels and mast-mounted infrared cameras gave the crew a clear picture. Night vision and IR systems meant for search and rescue were now quietly recording every Chinese maneuver. The Chinese ships never made it toward the coastline. They shadowed, tested, and stalked, but stayed outside the EEZ because everyone on that Chinese bridge knew 2 things. Any collision, ramming, or miscalculation here wouldn't stay secret. A mutual defense treaty was sitting in the background, whether anyone said the words out loud or not. The 1951 U.S.-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty meant that even a non-naval clash involving Coast Guard hulls could spiral into conversations Beijing did not want to have, especially with quadcopters, ISR aircraft, and journalists circling overhead. So the 3 big ships played cautious. Cabra did not. The patrol boat held the lane, constantly adjusting its bow to stay between Chinese hulls and Philippine waters, using disciplined ship handling and the local knowledge of sailors who know every shoal and ridge by memory. On paper, the Parola class is a multi-role response vessel built by Japan Marine United. About 321 tons, 44.5 meters long, 7.5 meters wide. Diesels pushing her to around 25 knots, about 1,500 nautical miles of endurance. Several ships in this class carry Israeli remote weapons stations, stabilized 12.7mm guns with thermal sights, the kind of weapon nobody wants pointed at them at 300 meters. But the Parola class's real weapon isn't mounted on the bow, it's behind the glass. Philippine Coast Guard crews live in the West Philippine Sea's worst neighborhoods, narrow passes, reef clutter, unpredictable currents, shoals that punish anyone who trusts the autopilot more than their own eyes. China has more ships. Manila has more local seamanship. Zoom out and the imbalance gets even more interesting. China has spent a decade turning its Coast Guard into a quasi-navy. Over 140 large hulls, some converted from PLA Navy destroyers and corvettes. But rapid growth comes with a bill. Crew shortages, rushed training, and slower reactions under pressure. On November 30th, those problems were visible. Aircraft, drones, and media teams weren't an add-on. They were part of Cabra's extended system. Every shadowing maneuver, every close pass, every course alteration was documented and cross-checked with AIS and radar logs. Each incident becomes evidence in diplomatic fights, ammunition in the information war, training data for the next confrontation. Beijing built the world's biggest Coast Guard expecting smaller neighbors to flinch. Instead, 3 of its ships ended up holding back from one small patrol boat because they weren't just facing Cabra. They were being watched from much higher up. High above the same waters where Cabra drew her line, MQ-9A Reaper drones from Marine Unmanned Squadron VMU-1 now orbit at altitude, 20,000, 30, sometimes 40,000 feet over the West Philippine Sea. Officially, unarmed. Practically, floating hard drives with wings. They launch from Besa Air Base in Pampanga, an installation the U.S. and the Philippines have quietly turned from a tired Cold War runway into a hardened ISR hub under the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement. From up there, confrontations like Cabra's aren't just another tense day at sea. They're data sets. The Reaper's multispectral cameras, maritime search radar, and signals intelligence payloads can track dozens of vessels simultaneously, zoom down to read hull numbers and banners, timestamp and geolocate every close pass or blocking maneuver. Every second of that video can be stored in multiple locations, Manila, Hawaii, and beyond, which means that any misunderstanding at sea now comes with a replay button and a GPS overlay. For American taxpayers, this is what quiet deterrence actually looks like. Reapers burning jet fuel and hard drives so your destroyers don't have to burn missiles. Basa Air Base used to be just a runway. Under EDCA, it now includes rebuilt runways and taxiways, new shelters and hangars, hardened fuel and power systems, facilities built specifically for long-endurance drones and allied aircraft. On paper, this looks like infrastructure. In practice, it's a nightmare for gray zone tactics. China once relied on murkiness, unclear locations, conflicting stories, deniable law enforcement actions. That ambiguity is evaporating under a cloud of unmanned aircraft. And the Reapers aren't alone. Over the last few years, Manila has stitched together a quietly impressive ISR ecosystem. U.S.-donated ScanEagle UAVs, catapult-launched small, persistent, feeding live video back to coastal command posts in the West Philippine Sea and Sulu Sea. Hermes 450 and Hermes 900 drones from Israel, operating from bases like Antonio Bautista and Palawan, carrying EO/IR cameras, maritime radar, and ESM pods, watching the Spratlys for dozens of hours at a time. U.S. MQ-9A Reapers, long legs, high altitude, big sensors, circling from Basa and integrating into Marine Corps Force Design 2030 concepts. Exercises like Prism Raven have already demonstrated U.S. Reapers and Philippine Hermes 900s working in parallel over the same airspace, sharing procedures, compatibility, and, eventually, data. Stack them all together and Cabra's world changes. Instead of one small patrol vessel playing chicken with larger ships, you have a 300-ton roadblock at sea, a wall of drones overhead watching every move, and a growing network of ground stations and command centers tying it all together. For the next Cabra crew that goes nose-to-nose with 3 cutters, that means something simple. This time, what happens on their radar doesn't just stay on their radar. Add to that the U.S. Philippines Task Force Philippines, a joint planning cell focused on the South China Sea, and suddenly an incident like November 30th isn't just a local flare-up. It becomes part of an integrated deterrence strategy. The message to Beijing is simple. Every time you push, we record. Every time you intimidate, we archive. And every time you miscalculate, we have receipts. In other words, U.S. Reaper drones don't need weapons to corner China's push. They just need bandwidth. But even the best video doesn't matter if there's nothing in the water to back it up. That's where the next ship enters the frame. 2 days after Cabra's standoff, on December 2nd, 2025, the Philippine Navy added one more layer, BRP Diego Silang, FFG-07. This is where Manila stops looking like a coastal patrol force. Diego Silang displaces about 3,200 tons, roughly 118 meters long, with a modern 3D AESA radar and integrated combat system, and a weapons fit that turns this hull from frigate into problem. A 16-cell VLS with VL-MICA SAMs, 8 Sea Star anti-ship missiles, Gok Dennis 35mm CIWS, a 76mm gun, torpedoes with hull sonar, and a hangar for a 10 to 12 ton helicopter. The ship can make around 25 knots and stay out thousands of miles from home. This frigate doesn't hug the coastline. It parks deep in the West Philippine Sea. Now rerun the Cabra scenario. Cabra on the front line, Chinese cutters on the horizon. But this time, 100 to 150 nautical miles behind her, Diego Silang is on station. The frigate's radar builds the full picture over Cabra. Its VLS throws an air defense bubble over Coast Guard and resupply ships. Its Sea Stars give Manila real sea-skimming punch if a bigger hull wants to test the line. Behind that, BrahMos coastal batteries on Luzon reach out nearly 290 kilometers at Mach 3+, while Reapers, Hermes, and Scan Eagles feed a shared picture into joint command centers and EDCA bases in Luzon and Palawan stand ready to push aircraft forward. A few years ago, a Chinese planner looking at the South China Sea saw patrol craft, old ships, and an ally distracted by insurgents. Now the same map shows missile frigates, new OPVs on the way, BrahMos on land, a thick ISR layer, and US, Japanese, Australian, and South Korean navies exercising alongside them. Diego Silang isn't there to duel a destroyer one-on-one. The frigate exists to make every Chinese move more complicated, more visible, and far more dangerous if they push too far. For Cabra and ships like it, that changes the psychology of the next encounter. The little white hull at the front of the formation is no longer bluffing alone. China wanted the South China Sea to stay a gray zone, foggy enough to deny and messy enough to intimidate. On November 30th, 3 larger Chinese ships held back from one small Philippine patrol vessel, not because they couldn't go faster, but because the price of pushing harder had gone up. The West Philippine Sea isn't a lake, but it's becoming a place where small ships, smart alliances, and a few well-placed drones can stop 3 cutters in their tracks. Bye for now.